If you think you've seen dark, think again. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and don't blink, because what you're about to hear will make you question what really happens behind closed doors. The quiet town of Ashwood, Oregon, wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. A picturesque community with white picket fences, coffee shops, and kids riding bikes down tree-lined streets, the kind of town where everyone knew each other by name. But that illusion shattered one cold October morning when a 911 call came from the Harrison residence on Alder Street. "Something's wrong." The voice on the line said, trembling. "It's my wife. I think she's gone." When police arrived, the scene didn't make sense. 36-year-old Rebecca Harrison, a well-liked art teacher at the local high school, was found lying motionless in the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No broken glass, no overturned furniture. Just a woman who looked eerily peaceful, except for one thing. A single, faint bruise encircled her neck. Detective Laura Kent, a seasoned investigator with 15 years in homicide, crouched near the body. "Someone wanted it to look like an accident," she murmured, examining the scene. But whoever did this didn't realize peace doesn't leave bruises. Her husband, David Harrison, stood nearby, his eyes glassy and unfocused. A respected real estate agent and father of two, he appeared genuinely devastated. "She was fine last night," he stammered. "We had dinner, watched TV. I went to bed before her. I woke up and she was..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The coroner ruled Rebecca's death as suspicious within hours. Toxicology was ordered. The press caught wind of the story, calling it Ashwood's mystery widow case. The small town buzzed with theories: a burglary gone wrong, an affair, or maybe a tragic suicide. But none of it fit. Kent noticed something small that others missed: a smear of paint on Rebecca's right wrist, a deep blue shade that didn't match any of the art supplies found in her studio. That same shade appeared again, faintly, on the edge of a cabinet near the sink. Why would there be paint in the kitchen, she wondered aloud. The next day, forensic results deepened the mystery. The paint was industrial grade, the kind used for sealing metal, not canvases. Even stranger, traces of the same material were found under Rebecca's fingernails. Meanwhile, neighbors began whispering. They said the Harrison family had seemed perfect, maybe too perfect. Always smiling at church, attending every PTA event, hosting barbecues. But behind those smiles, some claimed they heard shouting at night. Others said Rebecca had confided that something wasn't right at home, though she never said what. Then came the interview with their teenage daughter, Emily Harrison, age 16. Sitting across from Detective Kent, she looked pale and nervous, fingers twisting a loose thread from her hoodie. "My mom and dad argued a lot," she admitted softly. "She said she wanted to take me and my brother and leave. But she didn't get the chance." Kent pressed gently. "Do you know what they argued about?" Emily hesitated.
"Money."
"And secrets." "What kind of secrets?" But Emily shook her head. "She told me not to talk about it. She said people would get hurt." Days passed, and suspicion turned toward David. But when the autopsy report came back, things took a darker turn. Rebecca's cause of death wasn't strangulation, it was poisoning. A lethal mix of ethylene glycol, commonly found in antifreeze, had been ingested hours before her death. That changed everything. Police searched the house again, this time combing through every cabinet, every container. They found a bottle of homemade lemonade in the fridge, one that tested positive for traces of the same toxin. David swore he didn't know how it got there. "Rebecca made that herself," he insisted. "She drank it before bed. I had no idea." But something didn't add up. The fingerprints on the lemonade bottle belonged to both Rebecca and David. And on the counter, detectives found a grocery receipt from 2 nights earlier, with antifreeze listed under miscellaneous purchases. The card used? David's. When confronted, he broke down. "I didn't kill her," he cried. "I swear to you, I didn't. Someone's trying to frame me." Kent studied him carefully. "Then who would want your wife dead, Mr. Harrison?" He paused for a long time before whispering, "Ask my father." That single sentence froze the room. David's father, Charles Harrison was a retired police chief, a respected man in town, known for his rigid discipline and cold demeanor. But when detectives visited him, Charles was distant, evasive, almost hostile. "I've told my son for years," he said bitterly, "that you can't hide your sins forever." Maybe it's time the truth caught up with him. Kent left the house unsettled. What truth was he talking about? That night, as officers reviewed security footage from a nearby street camera, they noticed a faint silhouette outside the Harrison home at 2:13 a.m., just hours before Rebecca's body was discovered. The figure appeared to be male, wearing a dark jacket, carrying something metallic. The footage was grainy, but one frame caught a reflection in a passing car window, a familiar face. Detective Kent leaned forward, heart racing. It wasn't David. It was Charles Harrison. And when investigators returned to his house with a warrant, they found a small, locked trunk in his basement. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, was a bottle of industrial paint, the same shade found on Rebecca's wrist. But that wasn't the only thing inside. There was also a handwritten note, a single line that read, "She was going to tell Emily the truth." If you've made it this far, you're officially part of the investigation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the deeper we go, the darker it gets. The morning after the discovery in Charles Harrison's basement, the town of Ashwood felt different. The air hung heavier. Neighbors whispered across fences, news vans crowded Alder Street, and the once idyllic Harrison home now stood sealed off behind yellow police tape, the kind of tape that draws curious eyes and hides unthinkable truths. Detective Laura Kent stood in the precinct's evidence room, staring at the items recovered from Charles's house, the industrial paint, the note, and several old photographs of the Harrison family. One photo stood out. Rebecca, smiling awkwardly beside her husband and father-in-law, her eyes distant. Behind her, barely visible, was a small mark on the wall, the same faded blue paint. Kent's gut told her this wasn't just about a toxic marriage. It was generational. Something long buried was clawing its way to the surface. David Harrison sat in an interrogation room, pale, exhausted, and hollow-eyed. "You think my father did this?" he asked quietly. Kent didn't answer. "You said your wife was going to leave. Did your father know that?" "He knew everything," David muttered. "He kept tabs on us, on me, on Rebecca, even the kids. He said a man's family is his legacy, and that appearances were everything." Kent leaned forward. What did he mean by the truth? The one Rebecca was supposedly going to tell Emily? David swallowed hard. "I don't know. But whatever it was, my father was terrified she'd say it out loud." That afternoon, investigators searched Charles's house again, this time focusing on the basement. Beneath an old rug and a layer of concrete dust, they found something chilling, a patch of freshly disturbed cement near the corner. Forensics worked carefully, chiseling through the layer until the hollow sound of metal echoed. Inside, buried under the concrete, was a rusted lockbox. Inside the lockbox, a stack of old documents, several faded photographs, and a cassette tape labeled in messy handwriting, 1979, Harrison case. Kent's brow furrowed. "He was a police officer back then," she murmured. "What case is this?" Back at the station, they played the tape. The audio crackled with age, the sound of a younger Charles Harrison narrating an incident report. Victim, Sarah Miller, 24. Found deceased near Ridgeway Creek. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. No suspects. Case closed. Kent froze. "Sarah Miller," she whispered. The name sounded familiar. She scrolled through the digital archives, and there it was, a cold case from 1979. Unsolved. But something didn't fit. The original report listed the victim as a transient. No family, no connections. Yet inside the lockbox, one of the photographs showed a young woman with unmistakable features. The same eyes, the same jawline as Rebecca Harrison. Kent's heart pounded. Sarah Miller wasn't just some nameless victim. She was Rebecca's mother. That revelation tore the investigation wide open. If Rebecca had discovered that her father-in-law, Charles, had been involved in her mother's death decades earlier, That meant she had married into the family of the man who killed her mother. And Charles knew it. When detectives confronted him with the evidence, Charles sat motionless in his chair. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said coldly. "That woman was trouble. She wanted to ruin everything I built." Kent's voice hardened. "So you killed her, and when Rebecca found out, you killed her too." Charles chuckled darkly. "You think I'd poison my own daughter-in-law?"
No.
"That was never the plan. I just needed her quiet." His lawyer immediately cut in, ending the interrogation, but Kent had already heard enough. That night, Kent met with Emily Harrison again. The girl's hands trembled as she clutched a stuffed rabbit, the same one seen in a photo from when she was 6. "Emily," Kent said gently, "do you remember your grandfather talking to your mom before she died?" Emily nodded. "They argued in the kitchen. I heard her say, 'You lied to me.' And he said something like, 'I did what I had to do for this family.' Then he told me to go back upstairs."
Kent took a deep breath.
"Did your mom ever tell you anything about your grandmother?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "She said my grandmother didn't die in an accident like Grandpa told everyone. She said Grandpa hurt her, and that if anything ever happened to her, to my mom, I should look under the floor in her studio." Kent's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, under the floor?" 2 hours later, a forensics team was back at the Harrison home. They ripped up the hardwood floorboards in Rebecca's art studio, the one filled with her unfinished paintings, brushes still coated in that same haunting blue paint. Beneath the boards, inside a hidden compartment, they found a small metal box wrapped in fabric. Inside were old newspaper clippings about Sarah Miller's murder and a letter addressed to "My daughter, Emily." Kent read it silently. Rebecca had discovered her mother's true identity months before her death. The letter revealed that Sarah Miller had been romantically involved with a young Charles Harrison in the late 1970s. When she became pregnant, he refused to acknowledge her, fearing it would destroy his career. When she threatened to expose him, she disappeared. Rebecca had learned that she was the child Sarah was carrying. She was Charles Harrison's biological daughter, which meant David Harrison, Rebecca's husband, was her half-brother. Kent staggered back, breath shallow. The truth was beyond anything she could have imagined. Rebecca had discovered that her entire marriage, her family, her life, had been built on a lie. And before she could reveal it to Emily, Charles silenced her to protect his legacy. But then came the final blow. A DNA test from the poison bottle returned, and it wasn't Charles's DNA on the cap. It was Emily's. Kent stared at the report, disbelief washing over her. The fingerprint analysis confirmed it too. Emily had touched the poison bottle. When she returned to the precinct, Emily was already sitting there, calm, composed. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said quietly. "I just wanted her to stop fighting with Grandpa." Kent's hand trembled as she lowered the report. "What did you do, Emily?" The girl looked up, eyes hollow. "She told me the truth," Emily whispered. "And Grandpa said the truth destroys families. If you thought you knew how this story ends, think again. Hit subscribe, because this is where the truth turns deadly." The interrogation room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Detective Laura Kent sat across from 16-year-old Emily Harrison, the girl whose trembling confession had just shattered every assumption in the case. Emily sat still, her eyes fixed on the table, voice small and uneven. "I didn't want her to die. I just wanted her to stop fighting. Grandpa said she was going to take us away, that she was lying to everyone. He said she was sick." Kent leaned forward, steady but firm. "Emily, tell me exactly what happened that night." Emily's lip quivered. "Mom was crying. She said she couldn't live with the truth anymore, that I deserved to know who I was. Grandpa got angry when she told him. He said she was going to ruin us. I didn't understand what they were talking about. But later, Grandpa came into my room and said, 'If your mom drinks that lemonade, everything will be okay again.'" Kent's throat tightened. "He told you to give it to her?" Emily hesitated. "He said it would help her sleep." The silence that followed was heavy. Kent knew what that meant. Charles Harrison hadn't just silenced Rebecca. He had used his own granddaughter to do it. By the next morning, Charles was under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. The press swarmed the courthouse as officers led him out in handcuffs. The once revered police chief, his name now synonymous with betrayal. But inside the interrogation room, he didn't look defeated. He looked calm. "She was going to destroy our family," Charles said quietly, staring into Kent's eyes. "You don't understand what that means in a town like this. Reputation is everything. I did what I had to do to protect what I built." Kent's jaw tightened. "You didn't protect anything. You destroyed it." He smiled thinly. "Families survive lies. They don't survive the truth." The case went to trial within months. The courtroom was packed, reporters, locals, even former officers who had once served under Charles. The evidence was overwhelming. The poison, the letter, the DNA, and the confession. But when Emily took the stand, the world stopped. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just told the truth. "Grandpa said it would make everything better. I didn't know it would kill her. But when Mom started shaking and fell, he told me not to scream. He said this is what happens when people betray their family." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Charles never flinched. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Charles Harrison was found guilty of second-degree murder, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. His sentence: life in prison without parole. But justice, as Kent knew too well, didn't heal the scars it left behind. Emily was placed under psychiatric supervision, her mind fractured by guilt and manipulation. David, devastated and broken, left Ashwood entirely, unable to live among the memories that haunted every corner of Alder Street. For months, Detective Kent couldn't shake the image of Rebecca Harrison, a woman who had uncovered the truth too late. She started digging deeper into old archives, and what she found was chilling. Charles Harrison had handled at least 4 other suspicious deaths during his career, all ruled accidental, all women connected to him in some way. But each case had one thing in common: traces of that same blue paint. It wasn't just a color. It was a mark, his mark. She reopened every one of those cases. And as she stood in the dim light of the evidence room, that same color stared back from the bottles and photos, like ghosts refusing to stay buried. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. The Harrison story wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a pattern, a legacy of control, fear, and secrets passed down like heirlooms. Months later, Kent received a letter postmarked from a state juvenile facility. It was from Emily. "Dear Detective Kent, I remember the night you told me the truth about who my mother really was. You said the truth can hurt, but it can also heal. I still think about her. I paint sometimes with that same blue color she loved. Grandpa said families survive lies, but I think he was wrong. Maybe the truth doesn't destroy families. Maybe it just shows who they really are. Emily." Kent read the letter twice, folded it gently, and stared out her window. The town of Ashwood looked peaceful again, kids biking, neighbors waving, the illusion restored. But she knew better now. Behind every white fence and manicured lawn, there were doors that stayed closed for a reason. And sometimes, what hides behind them isn't evil born in darkness, but evil carefully raised in daylight. As she placed the file back in her cabinet, she noticed something small in the evidence bag, a dried streak of blue paint that had rubbed off from one of Rebecca's brushes. It was faint, almost invisible, but still there. A quiet reminder that some truths never really fade. The story of the Harrison family ended with one man in prison, a family shattered, and a town forever changed. But as Kent closed the file, she noticed another case folder sitting just beneath it, marked unsolved. Different name, different address, but that same faint trace of blue. Her phone buzzed. A new call. Another missing woman. And just like that, the past wasn't done yet. They thought the truth had been buried forever. But in Ashwood, secrets never stay buried for long. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe because the next case starts where this one ends.